Welcome to Sociology 102, Police Violence, Black Lives Matter, and the COVID-19 Pandemic. I'm your instructor, Professor Ray, and today I'm joined by Dr. Rashawn Ray. He is the David M. Rubenstein Fellow for Governance Studies and Professor of Sociology at the University of Maryland. Welcome, Professor Ray.
Thank you for having me. It's such a pleasure to be here with you, and I really look forward to the conversation.
Oh, so too am I. And I'm going to start it with something that we don't get to do enough in sociology, the personal. As you turned 40 years old, you realized that you had been stopped by the police more than 40 times. And we often hear that when the police stop you, you must be doing something that's obviously wrong. So, what were you doing?
Yeah, to your point, Professor Weary, as sociologists, we rarely get personal, but now working at a think tank like Brookings, one thing I know being a policy analyst and going to Capitol Hill and, as you know, testifying and those sort of things, the personal and the stories matter just as much as the statistics. So I started reflecting on my own biography as it relates to policing, since I've studied policing for many years. And part of what I realized are the things that I have been stopped by the police for or given citations and tickets for are normal things that people do: running, walking, eating, studying. I remember studying for my comprehensive exams at Indiana University, being stopped there, going to the mall with friends, sitting in my car, talking on the cell phone, sending a message on my phone. And then, of course, I've been stopped for speeding. But even in some of those moments, I would be in a pack of cars. And one thing I know about policing is that typically police officers will stop the first car, the last car, not only because it's easier, but also because it alters the way that vehicles are moving in a pack. And sometimes I would be in the middle and be pulled over. And when asked why I was stopped from being in the middle, they would say, well, it's nothing personal. We had to pull over someone. And whenever people tell you that it's nothing personal, it probably has a personal element to it. But I also think that beyond that, my own personal biography highlights the experiences, in particular, of a lot of Black people and specifically Black men. And I think it's a couple of few examples that I can provide. The first is some of my colleagues and I, we conducted a large study with civilians in a county and their experiences with police officers. We asked them a common question that polls ask from, Gallup to, other sorts of polls, Pew, on a scale from 1 to 10, how positive have your experiences been with the police? So we primed the positive. And on average, people said about a 7, and including Black men. But of course, as you know, we have to look beyond the quantitative number and ask about the qualitative aspect behind that number. And an example from a middle-aged Black man who was in his mid-40s, what he said really stuck out and was emblematic of other Black men's experiences. He said, scale of 1 to 10, I would probably say about a 7. The interviewer said, well, why a 7? He said, well, I've had the typical experience like other Black men where I've had a gun pulled on me by police for no reason. To still give a 7 on a scale from 1 to 10 for having a gun pulled on you for no reason is pretty emblematic of the traumatic experiences that Black people have with the police. And one thing, of course, as you noted in the piece I wrote at Brookings, Bad Apples Come from Rotten Trees in Policing, is that I don't have a criminal record. I have a PhD. Neither one of those things should matter in my experiences with the police. And clearly they don't in the number of experiences that I have. I think another example is highlighted by Robbie Tolan, who was a minor league baseball player in Texas. And Robbie Tolan, because of course we know about the George Floyds now. We know about Michael Brown. We know about Eric Garner, Tamir Rice, Sandra Bland, Breonna Taylor. But there are so many people who don't get a hashtag. And Robbie Tolan is one of those examples. He was coming back from a New Year's party with his cousin, going to his house in the suburbs in Texas. His father played professional baseball, and Robbie was going to do the same thing in minor leagues. And police started following them. They got to their house, said, this is where we live. Police didn't believe them. Robbie's parents came out. The police approached his parents, his mother in particular, aggressively. Robbie was already on the ground at that point in time. He stood up. He said, what are you doing to my mom? Robbie Tolan is shot. His baseball career is finished. And then, of course, we could think about Ahmaud Arbery, who was out for a jog. And my research has highlighted the experiences of Black people trying to exercise, particularly in predominantly white neighborhoods. Ahmaud Arbery is relevant because one of the assailants who participated in his murder, Gregory McMichael, was a former police officer and a former investigator for the prosecutor's office. So we see the way these sort of things are connected, that Black men become criminalized. Our Blackness becomes weaponized, meaning even when we don't have a weapon, it's perceived that we're dangerous and threatening and that we can't control our emotions. And it leads to a justification for the use of force that we experience by police.
And when you think about sort of how some of your personal troubles are certainly informed by these larger public issues, what do we know about the rate at which Black people are being stopped or killed by the police?
I mean, that's a great question. And this is why it's so important to more so contextualize these individual experiences, because they're not simply individual. Derek Chauvin, who killed George Floyd, he's not simply a bad apple, but he's a bad apple that comes from a rotten tree. The rotten tree meaning the structural elements of law enforcement that lead to these outcomes. And in particular, we have to be very realistic about the historical links with law enforcement. That law enforcement, particularly in the South, comes from slave patrols, where when people were aiming to flee the plantation, Black people were trying to flee enslavement, and a lot of them tried, way more so than what history would like to tell us, that they had slave patrols who would go and track them. And interestingly, it wasn't only white people who would track them, but they would also recruit and hire and force Black people to track other Black people as well. And that's one of the biggest findings I have on policing from our virtual reality lab that we have at the University of Maryland, where I direct the lab for applied social science research, is that the race of the officer doesn't matter much in these policing encounters. Now, there is some research showing that having a more diverse administration matters. We could talk about that. But when it comes to statistics, there are a few that we really have to highlight. First, Black people are 3.5 times more likely than whites to be killed by police when they're not attacking or have a weapon. That's George Floyd, didn't have a weapon, wasn't attacking. A Black person in the United States is killed every 40 hours. That's Breonna Taylor. She was sitting in, like sleeping in her home peacefully when police came up with a no-knock warrant and killed her. As her fiance was like, who's coming into my house? It's Kentucky. You have the right to have a gun in your home. Like, honestly, most states do. We also know that Black teenagers are 21 times more likely than white teenagers to be killed by police. That would be Tamir Rice. That would be Antoine Rose. Of course, I mean, if we could even consider Tamir Rice at 12 years old to be a teenager, Tamir Rice would have graduated from high school this year. He would be heading to college as a freshman. He turned 18 he would have turned 18 a couple months ago. So these are the statistics that bear out in terms of what's going on. And we have to be very clear, because to your point earlier, it's like, oh, well, if people did this, they had to be doing something wrong. People should really listen to the first stat that I said. Black people are 3.5 times more likely to be killed when they're not attacking or have a weapon. Who says that? Police officers themselves. But this is why it's a problem. We know how many people are actually killed by jellyfish every year. Now, we're still trying to figure out COVID, but we've done a good job of also figuring out the flu. How many people catch the flu? How many people die from it? But we don't know how many people are shot and killed by the police. That should unnerve us all. That's information that we should have, because Derek Chauvin, who had 18 complaints, his partner, Tao, has 6 complaints. Interestingly, under this supposedly progressive police chief in Minneapolis, who's been coming out talking about a lot, he was over internal affairs when most of those complaints came in. And he's also the same police chief who sued Minneapolis along with 4 other Black officers nearly 15 years ago for failure to promote and wrongful discipline. They received about an $800,000 lawsuit. So we can see, even with just Minneapolis, it's not simply about Derek Chauvin. This is part of a broader system in Minneapolis. And I've studied a lot of police departments around the country. They're not an anomaly. They are unfortunately the norm.
Yes. And as you point out, there are these institutional rules and practices. They shape our behavior, but we can create new rules as well. But we have to decide that we want to create them. So You've talked about some of these new rules that need to be created. So can you talk a little bit about that with us today?
Yeah, definitely. I think one piece of legislation right now that's really strong is the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act that was led by Congresswoman Bass, who was head of the Congressional Black Caucus, but also informed by Senator Cory Booker and also Senator Kamala Harris. And we have to be very clear that the Senate controlled by Republicans, House of Representatives controlled by Democrats, that there's a stalemate right now. But Senator Cory Booker has really been pushing that. And I think that's important for students in class, of course, coming from all over the world, but particularly where you all are located at in the context of the United States. So a lot of people over the past 5 years have focused on things like implicit bias trainings, body worn cameras, more surveillance. And I've studied those things. And the problem with these solutions, and this is saying this as a person who does these implicit bias trainings, our virtual reality program is second to none, but it is an individualistic program. It's a program that focuses on individuals, not the cultural organization of law enforcement and the structural factors that lead to these disparities. Because you can implement all of these particular solutions, but if you don't deal with the rotten tree, they're not doing anything at that juncture. So there are some other things that could be done. The biggest thing for me is we have to restructure civilian payouts for police misconduct. One thing that people don't know is that when there is a civil payout for police misconduct, meaning that even if an officer has been found not guilty in criminal court, and oftentimes over 90% of the time, charges are never even brought forth. There's not even an investigation. And even when charges are brought forth, over 90% of the time, the officer is never charged. We have to put that in context, because sometimes we see these examples of former Officer Slager in down in the Carolinas who killed Walter Scott. Well, he said that Walter Scott was trying to get his gun and someone just happened to be filming it with their phone and see Walter Scott running away for failure to pay child support. That's what he was running away from. Now, look, I also study family. I think people need to pay their child support. People need to take care of their kids, but you shouldn't necessarily be killed for it.
Yes.
And so people over individualize those convictions. Oftentimes what happens, officers are not found guilty at all. They don't even face charges. They aren't even investigated for killing someone. But if the state rules that the killing was unjustified, the family gets a civil payout. That money comes from taxpayer money. It doesn't come out the police department budget. It comes out the general fund. How egregious is this? Well, in a city like Chicago, that's embroiled with a series of issues, over the past 2 decades, Chicago has spent $650 million paying out civilian payouts for police misconduct. In
you
Baltimore,
said $650 million?
650 million. Yes. Okay. 650 million. And there are other cities that have spent well over 100, 200,000. Baltimore, which of course people know from Freddie Gray. There's another case that people don't know, Corinne Gaines. People should look her up, name spelled with a K. But in short, she said that she had been accosted by the police. She had been filming it. A Department of Justice report essentially confirmed that she had been being profiled as well as others. And she got served a warrant for failure to appear in court. She was protesting. She was like, I don't want to go to court for something I feel like I shouldn't go for. After a few hours of standoff, police bust up in her house. She's holding her son, also holding a gun that I believe was registered to her. They shoot and kill her and also shoot her son. Her son was 4 years old. She was awarded $32 million. Well, her family was awarded $36 million, $32 million, which went to her son. A judge then came back and said Baltimore did not have enough money to pay it. Another judge just came up and said they're going to be forced to pay it. That's what this situation is. Wow. And one thing your students should think about is, have they even heard of Corinne Gaines? Like, this is how prominent this is. Like, this is your people are like, what? Hold up, a mother got killed holding her kid and her kid got shot and I didn't know about it. This is the sort of thing that happens. What I'm proposing is that we shift this money away from taxpayer money. Like, imagine if that money went to the west side of Baltimore for schools and work infrastructure. Imagine in Chicago if that money went to the south and west side of Chicago. Imagine the change that would happen in local communities. If we make a shift to police department insurance policies, this does two things. We already have a model for this. First, Small municipalities, which they have them all over the United States, Jersey's no different, where these are these small places that have been constructed, oftentimes because people are trying to engage in racial segregation and economic segregation, to be honest about it, as you know. But part of thinking about that, they have a municipality insurance policy. So when they get hit with a large settlement, because these municipalities don't have enough money, we need that for larger municipalities as well, counties and cities. And we have a really good model, which is in healthcare. When you go to the hospital and something goes wrong, a physician has their own health insurance, yes, but the hospital becomes liable the same way that the police department should be liable. This will give police chiefs and elected officials a market-driven approach by which to say, Derek Chauvin, you have cost us $5 million over the past decade. We can no longer afford to keep you here. Let them go. And then as the premium increases, it will also then hold police departments in check. So I think that is one of the main things that needs to change. I think the other thing that I'll quickly mention is as people are playing up civilian oversight boards, and I know a lot about these civilian oversight boards because I've studied them, I've been on them. These are boards where civilians are supposed to provide oversight for the police department. Oftentimes, police chiefs don't balk at that at all. They're perfectly fine with it. Like they're like, yeah, sure, I'll support that. The reason why they want to do that is because they realize the civilian oversight boards have no control at all. They just have symbolic power. So what we need is a civilian on the internal trial board. This is what people don't realize. Police officers police themselves. They have a trial board in large departments, typically made up of 3 people, a major, a captain, and someone else who serves as judge and jury after it's went through internal affairs, an extensive process, but it gets to them and they make a ruling on what should happen. Should a person be let go? Should they get a penalty? What should that penalty be? Should they be fired? Should they be demoted? Should they pay a fine? I mean, a host of things that the public never gets access to. And this is why we need access to it, because our tax money pays for them to keep us safe. And right now, that's not happening.
I mean, one of the things that's really striking is that as you talk about these market-based solutions for disciplining organizations like the police force, it's a discussion that we have without even blinking when it comes to what to do about healthcare. It's a discussion we have without a second thought when we think about incentives for work or incentives not to work if it's welfare. So whenever we're talking about welfare, we're talking about health insurance, suddenly the market matters. Suddenly people start saying moral hazard, and they say, you know, you need to be able, you have to pay for what you do. But when we're talking about policing, as you know, you could have someone who's, you know, costing you 5 million here, 20 million over there, and you say, oh no, it's not a problem. So I think one of the important things too that you do in your work is you're able to show us how we can sometimes apply certain logics that we take for granted to poor people. We can apply it to Black and brown people, but when it comes to applying those same standardized logics to power, to the police force, suddenly can't do it. So this is one of the reasons why I said to the students, you're going to need to meet Professor Ray, because this is the kind of work you do. This is how you do. You're also the executive director of the Lab for Applied Social Science Research at the University of Maryland. And I know that lab has been up to quite a few things. So can you share with us a little bit about what you're doing with the lab?
Yeah, I really appreciate this question. I mean, my colleagues in LASSR, I mean, they're just amazing. So, I mean, we have a pipeline of faculty, postdocs, graduate students, and undergraduates who work in the lab with me. And I mean, they're simply extraordinary. I mean, we've been building it over the years. And I mean, we are really optimized with a great group of advanced grad students. And I mean, it's some undergraduate students. One, for example, her name is Rebecca Shankman. I mean, she is phenomenal. I'm so glad that we convinced her to go get a PhD in sociology. So be on the lookout for her. She's pretty phenomenal. But part of thinking about that is what we do is we aim to connect social science research to policymakers. And we aim to do it with innovative research products, like our virtual reality program that we develop with computer scientists and corporations. So what this looks like is people come into the lab, police officers put on virtual reality goggles. We're developing other things for cyberbullying and things around the prevention of sexual assault and a host of things. But for policing, that's already been optimized. We've been doing it for a few years now. Put on the goggles, they're immediately immersed into a virtual world where they encounter experiences that they do every day. Because this is one thing that people have to know. And this also speaks to defund the police, which a lot of people are talking about. I can say something about that in a second. But in short, 9 out of 10 calls for service have nothing to do with violence. Like, in fact, the violence doesn't really happen at all. And sometimes when violence does, police officers actually initiate and instigate that violence. But the reason why they do that is because police officers receive about 50 to 100 hours of firearm training, but they receive less than 10 hours of de-escalation training. So if you've been trained to do something 5 or 10 times more than something else, when you get in a stressful situation, you're going to rely on your training. So this is where the rotten tree comes in. It doesn't matter who the officer is. Now, in the George Floyd example, that was egregious, but those sort of things play out all the time. I mean, there are Black men who have been saying even since George Floyd, talking about they can't breathe. And even before that, Eric Garner and others who were saying they can't breathe. So it's part of the tactics. So what we do is we like to train to the norm as sociologists. That's one of the things we do. We're like, what is the normal? Police officers are commonly trained to the extreme. So we put them in this virtual world. It looked for some of your students who play video games, like my kids, like it looks like Fortnite when you go in. Like, I mean, it's one of the most amazing things people have seen. And they encounter things like burglaries of stores, suspicious people at bus stops, domestic house scenes where a neighbor called the police on someone. Students can kind of think about that, like a neighbor calling the police on you for making noise. You're having a party, or like I was in grad school, I'm just sitting in my apartment studying. I just happened to be a Black person that lived upstairs from these people. So mental health, traffic stops, and we can measure a host of things so that we have an algorithm that allows the virtual reality character to respond back to the officer. The algorithm is set up to respond to the voice of the officer, so their tone of voice, their word usage, and their distance. And the algorithm builds on itself. So currently it has over 1,000 responses. The more officers who use it, and we've had well over 100 officers use it, the more officers who use it, the more words that the program learns, which is pretty neat. So officers never have the same experience. But we can also measure officers' physiology, their heart rate, their stress level, their reaction time, their eye movement, their body movement. We video record them. And then we layer this up with attitudinal measures, which of course sociologists love to include. We have implicit bias questions. So we use the implicit association test. We have explicit bias measures. And then we have a host of demographics and things they think about social dominance. We put all that into a statistical model. We can give that back to police departments about ways that then they can tailor an implicit bias training to their specific department. So some departments have issues with language, like because the characters will cuss at you, right? The other neat thing from an experimental standpoint is we vary the character that officers encounter by race and gender. So the male characters have the same voice. The woman characters have the same voice, but then we vary the race. So the only difference is who they're looking at. And I mean, a few things that people might want to know. I mentioned earlier, we don't find a race or gender difference in the officer's biography. So in other words, the race of the officer doesn't matter in how they treat the characters, the virtual reality characters. Police officers are more likely to hold implicit bias against Black people. They are also more likely to disrespect Black women. They are more likely to be disrespectful to Black women. And part of the logic there is that as the characters get angry, officers perceive the Black woman as being an angry Black woman, falling along those stereotypes. But when the white woman gets angry, they get more deferential, kind of like a damsel in distress. So we see how these tropes, these intersectional tropes that, Dr. Patricia Hill Collins and others have highlighted that play out as it relates to racial and sexual politics, play out in our findings. And then the final thing we find, which I think is really, really interesting, that the more ambiguous the setting, the more racial bias comes out. That makes sense because the way implicit bias works is the more information we know, the more we're relying on objective information. The less information we know, the more we rely on implicit bias. And in policing, one of the biggest factors is what information officers get from dispatch. Like take Tamir Rice. Person called and said, I think it's a kid playing in the park with something in their hand, kind of looks like a gun, but it might be a toy gun. He's not doing anything with it. When the dispatch relayed that information, they did not say toy gun and they did not say kid. So when the police officers showed up, they showed up seeing a person with a gun who police officers thought was older. This is the other thing, because this is such a horrible example. The other thing is that the officers who showed up at the scene had a lot of previous incidents. Timothy Loman, who killed Tamir Rice, had previously been let go from a previous department for being unfit mentally to be a cop. And the other officer who
What,
was
unfit?
yes, unfit
Unfit.
mentally.
Okay, mentally
Like,
for being a cop. Let
yeah,
go.
yeah,
Okay.
unfit, like, look, Professor Weary, to be unfit mentally to be a cop, I really don't think people understand the gravity of that, because most officers are not let go to be unfit mentally. Like, I mean, it's so extreme. And then the other officer had a $250,000 settlement for him because he was called to a scene. A woman said that a car was blocking her driveway. The woman who called ended up being body slammed and hospitalized by this cop. And of course, it just happened to be a black woman. So this is the recipe for these outcomes. And I think what we're doing in LASSR, and then we take the information, we go testify on Capitol Hill, we testify in Annapolis, Pennsylvania, I mean, Virginia, a whole bunch of states that we've done to work with organizations and law enforcement around the country to help change policy.
Well, you're not just doing the work, but you're doing it in an innovative way, which speaks well to our discipline. And so I think that's how I want to close this out, by thinking about the discipline, because you are in your spare time, you are the co-editor of Context, which
Right.
is a magazine that brings sociological findings to a broader public. And so in this moment that we're in, with all of these crises and with police violence and Black Lives Matter, and now we're in a pandemic, what is it about what we do as sociologists that places us in a position to speak well to these crises?
I think sociologists are primed for this moment. Professor Alden Morris, who is the president-elect of the American Sociological Association, he said recently about how sociologists must use our research to inform what's happening. And I said something similar, that we wrote pieces in ASA footnotes. And I think what sociologists bring to bear is a structural and cultural perspective on why people do what they do, in crises or not. Like, what's happening in a normative way, what's happening in other ways. We have methodological skill sets that help us to use data to inform where gaps are, but also not only where gaps are, but where people are getting things correct. So when it comes to the racial gap, which we know in COVID exists between blacks and whites, and now also between Latinos and whites, sociologists were screaming that outside of New York, where we've seen blacks and Latinos being hit hard, that as COVID hit cities, Black people are going to be hit hard. But as it spreads throughout the South and rural America, Latinos are going to be hit hard. And America continues to be behind it because we were taking a colorblind approach to it. What Context aimed to do to help inform this, we sent out a special call for essays on COVID-19, kind of rapid pieces, research pieces from academics. And we got 200 submissions from over 20 countries around the world. I mean, it was so overwhelming, to your point. Like, it was in our spare time, like with our small staff trying to navigate this. But we took this information and we were able to inform what was happening. And people could go to context.org, Context Magazine, Sociology for the Public. They can get these articles. They're free for the first month, and anything we publish on the website just stays there. In 2019, we had over 1 million views and downloads to the websites. So, I mean, Context is really having a big impact in how people think about sociology. And as you know, Professor Weary, we got the subtitle change. So myself and Fabio Rojas, that had been something that Context editors have been trying to do. And we just built onto it and finally got the momentum to finally change the subtitle to Sociology for the Public. Before that, it was Understanding People in Their Social Worlds. I don't know what the heck that meant. Like, I'm sure it was good 20 years ago, but we needed something to prime sociology. And we couldn't change the context part, but we could change the subtitle to help people realize that sociologists are doing the work and we need to continue to do more.
So thank you for doing the work. Thank you for joining us. I know that your dance card is full and not just full, but overpacked. So thank you for joining us today. And I look forward to seeing where your work takes us as a country and as a world. Thank you so much.